The rain was not falling. It was attacking the city with a violence that felt personal. Sheets of water crashed down from a black sky, turning Manhattan streets into rivers that swallowed the pavement whole. Thunder rolled through the darkness like the growl of some angry god, and lightning split the sky so bright it turned night into day for one blinding second before plunging everything back into shadow. Deep beneath the flooded streets, in the forgotten maintenance tunnels under the old subway line, Lena Moore walked alone. Her boots splashed through ankle-deep water that had no business being there. The yellow beam of her flashlight cut through the darkness, bouncing off wet concrete walls that pressed in from both sides. The tunnel smelled like rust and mold and the kind of dampness that settled into your bones and never left. Her breath came out in small white clouds. November had turned cruel this year, and down here in the dark, the cold felt alive. Lena was 27 years old, but tonight she felt 100. Her body ached after 12 straight hours on her feet, checking tunnel supports, clearing debris, making sure the old infrastructure could handle the storm raging above. Her dark blonde hair was pulled back in a messy bun, strands escaping to stick to her damp forehead. Her maintenance uniform, a faded gray jumpsuit with her name stitched over the pocket, was soaked through at the knees and elbows. Her green eyes, pale as sea glass, were ringed with the kind of exhaustion that came from working 2 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night. She wanted to go home. She wanted to sink into her lumpy mattress in her tiny studio apartment and sleep for 3 days straight. But home would have to wait. The storm was getting worse, and someone had to make sure the tunnels did not flood completely. Someone had to check the drainage gates and the old support beams that had been holding up this section of track since 1952. That someone was always Lena. Because Lena never said no when her supervisor called. Because Lena needed every dollar of overtime pay she could scrape together. Because rent was due in 2 days, and she was still $400 short. The water was rising. Lena noticed it as she moved deeper into the tunnel. What had been ankle-deep 5 minutes ago now lapped at her shins. The drainage system was overwhelmed. Somewhere above her, storm drains were backing up, sending water cascading down into the old tunnels like waterfalls. She should turn back. Every instinct screamed at her to turn around and get out while she still could. But she had 3 more gates to check, and if one of them failed, the entire section would flood and take out power to 6 blocks of the city. So she kept walking, flashlight beam sweeping left and right, boots sloshing through water that climbed higher with every step. And then she heard it. A sound that did not belong in the empty tunnel. Coughing. Small, desperate, gasping coughing that echoed off the concrete walls and made Lena's heart stop cold in her chest. Lena froze, her flashlight beam fixed on the tunnel ahead. The coughing came again, weak and wet, like someone trying to breathe through water. "Hello?" Her voice came out sharper than she meant, echoing back at her from the darkness. "Is someone there?" Silence. Then more coughing, further ahead, coming from somewhere near the collapsed drainage gate she had been sent to inspect. Lena's pulse kicked up. No one should be down here. The tunnels were restricted, locked down, dangerous even on good days. On a night like this, with water pouring in and the storm raging above, these tunnels were a death trap. She moved forward, faster now, water splashing up to her knees. Her flashlight beam swept across rusted pipes and crumbling walls until it caught on something that made her breath catch. A shoe. Small, bright red, floating past her like a tiny boat. A child's shoe. "Oh God," Lena whispered, and she started to run. The coughing got louder as she rounded the corner, and her flashlight beam landed on a section of collapsed fencing that had once protected the old drainage gate. The gate itself had buckled under the pressure of the storm, twisted metal jutting out at wrong angles, and behind it, wedged in the narrow space between the gate and the tunnel wall, was a small shape. A boy. He could not have been more than 9 or 10 years old, soaked to the bone, curled in on himself, shaking so hard his whole body trembled. His dark hair was plastered to his head, his face pale as death in the harsh beam of her flashlight. He wore what had once been nice clothes, a navy blue sweater and khaki pants, now torn and muddy and dripping. One foot was bare, the other still wearing its matching red shoe. But what made Lena's heart break was his eyes. Wide, brown, filled with the kind of pure terror that no child should ever feel. The terror of someone who knows they are going to die. Water rushed around his small body, already past his waist and climbing. In minutes, it would be at his chest. In 10 minutes, maybe 15, it would cover his head. Lena did not think. She lunged forward into the freezing water, the cold stealing her breath, and grabbed the twisted metal of the collapsed gate. "I've got you," she said, her voice steady even though her hands were shaking. "I've got you. You're going to be okay." The boy looked up at her with those terrified brown eyes, and his whole body shook harder. He tried to speak, but all that came out was more coughing, wet and painful. Lena could see it now. He was not just scared. He was having an asthma attack, his small chest heaving with the effort to pull in air, each breath a high-pitched wheeze that barely made it past his lips. "Easy," Lena said, moving closer, the water now at her own waist and rising fast. "Slow breaths. In through your nose, out through your mouth. Can you do that for me?" The boy tried. He really tried. But panic had him in its grip, and panic made everything worse. Lena reached him, wedged herself into the narrow space beside him, and wrapped one arm around his small, shaking body. With her other hand, she unwound the wool scarf from around her neck. It was old, dark green, fraying at the edges, the only warm thing she owned that still worked. It had been a gift from her grandmother before she died, and Lena had worn it through 5 winters. She wrapped it around the boy, tight, tucking it close against his chest. "This will keep you warm," she said, her voice low and calm, the way you talk to a frightened animal. "And I'm not going anywhere. Do you understand? I'm staying right here with you." The boy's shaking eased just a fraction. His eyes locked onto hers, desperate for something to hold onto, and Lena saw the moment he decided to trust her. His small hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. His fingers were ice cold, and Lena could feel him trembling. And then he said the words that changed everything. "Please," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Please don't call the police." Lena went still. The water rushed around them, cold and relentless, climbing higher with every passing second. Thunder boomed somewhere far above, shaking the tunnel walls. But Lena barely heard any of it. All she could hear was that small, terrified voice saying, "Don't call the police." Every instinct she had was screaming at her to call 911. A child trapped in a flooding tunnel, alone, injured, having an asthma attack. This was exactly the kind of emergency the police existed for. They had rescue teams, equipment, people trained for exactly this situation. But the fear in the boy's eyes was real. This was not the fear of the water or the dark or the storm. This was something else entirely. Something deeper and more dangerous. "Sweetheart," Lena said gently, still holding him close, "the police can help us. They have boats and divers and—" "No." The word came out sharp, desperate. The boy's grip on her wrist tightened until it hurt. "No police. Please. You don't understand." "Then help me understand," Lena said. She knew they did not have much time. The water was at her chest now, and the boy's chin was barely above the surface. But she also knew that sometimes a few seconds of listening could save hours of struggle. "Tell me why." The boy's teeth chattered so hard he could barely speak. But he forced the words out, each one carrying the weight of real fear. "My dad," he said. "My dad is important. And there are bad people who watch him. Who watch me. If the police come, if this gets reported, if they put it in their system." His voice broke. "The bad people will know where I am. They'll find me. He could not finish. Another coughing fit seized him, his small body convulsing with the effort to breathe. Lena's mind raced. Important. Bad people watching. Fear of police records. This was not just a scared kid. This was a kid who understood surveillance, who understood security leaks, who had been taught to fear official channels. Her eyes dropped to his wrist, the one not gripping her arm, and she saw it for the first time. A bracelet. Not a child's toy or a piece of cheap jewelry. This was real gold, thick and solid, with some kind of tracker built into it. The kind of technology that cost thousands of dollars. The kind of thing only very rich or very dangerous people wore. Everything clicked into place. This was not an ordinary lost child. This was someone's carefully guarded secret. Someone powerful. Someone who could not afford to have his son's rescue broadcast on police scanners and evening news. Lena looked into those desperate brown eyes and made a decision that would change her life forever. "Okay," she said quietly. "No police. But I had to call someone, sweetheart. I can't get you out of here by myself. The water's too high, and you're stuck. Do you understand?" The boy nodded, relief flooding his small face even as tears mixed with the water on his cheeks. "Can you tell me your name?" Lena asked. "Ethan," he whispered. "Ethan Valenti. Valenti." The name hit Lena like a punch to the chest. Everyone in New York knew that name. Everyone who read newspapers or watched the news or simply existed in this city knew who the Valentis were. They were old money and new power. They owned half the construction companies in Manhattan. They controlled unions and city contracts. They were the kind of family people whispered about but never accused of anything, because accusations had a way of disappearing along with the people who made them. And if the rumors were true, and Lena had always assumed they were, the Valentis were not just wealthy businessmen. They were something much more dangerous. "Ethan," Lena said, keeping her voice calm even though her heart was hammering against her ribs, "I need you to give me a phone number." "Your father's number. Can you do that?" Ethan nodded. He recited a string of numbers in a trembling whisper, as if it were a secret code he had memorized for exactly this kind of emergency. Lena pulled her phone from the waterproof pouch on her belt. Her hands shook as she entered the numbers. The screen glowed bright in the darkness, and for one long second, she stared at it. Once she made this call, there was no going back. Once she spoke to Marco Valenti, once she pulled his world into contact with hers, everything would change. But Ethan was running out of time. The water was at his neck now, and his breathing was getting worse, each inhale a painful wheeze that barely brought in air. Lena hit the call button and lifted the phone to her ear. It did not even ring. It was answered on the first beat, as if someone had been sitting with their finger hovering over the screen, waiting for hours, for days, for this exact call. "Speak." The voice on the other end was a low, dangerous growl. Not a question, a command. The voice of someone used to being obeyed instantly. The kind of voice that could silence an entire room with a single word. And underneath the command, Lena heard something else. Something raw and barely contained. Fear. The smoldering, desperate fear of a father who knows his child is in danger. Lena drew in a deep breath. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, clear and calm, because that was what the situation required. "My name is Lena Moore. I'm a maintenance worker in the old subway tunnels under West 23rd Street. Your son is here with me. He's trapped behind a collapsed drainage gate, and the tunnel is flooding." She paused, then said the words that she knew would hit like a bullet. "He's running out of air." Silence. Not the empty silence of a dead phone line. This was the silence of a man whose entire world had just shattered and was trying to piece it back together fast enough to function. Lena could hear everything through that silence. She heard the sharp inhale of breath, the kind of sound you make when you have been punched in the chest. She heard the scrape of a chair, the sudden movement of someone who had been sitting frozen and was now exploding into action. She heard other voices in the background, sharp and urgent, cut off when the man on the phone barked a single word in Italian that made them all go silent. Then Marco Valenti spoke again, and his voice had changed. The cold command was still there, but now it was wrapped around something raw and vulnerable, something Lena knew he rarely let anyone hear. "Ethan," he said his son's name, not as a question, but like a prayer, like confirmation of his deepest fear. "Is he hurt?" Lena's eyes went to Ethan, who was watching her with those wide brown eyes, half submerged in freezing water, small body shaking with cold and fear and the desperate effort to breathe. She wanted to paint a picture for this man, to make him understand not just that his son was alive, but how bad things really were. "He's conscious," Lena said, her voice soft but honest. "He's wrapped in my scarf for warmth, and I'm holding him. He has some cuts and bruises, and he's having trouble breathing. Asthma, I think. The water is rising fast. It's at his neck now." She paused, then added the truth he needed to hear. "But he's very brave. He's right here beside me, and he's fighting. He's okay for now, but we're running out of time." The silence on the other end deepened. It was no longer the silence of shock. It was the silence of a storm gathering force, of a predator calculating the fastest path to its prey, of a father being pulled back from the edge of hell by the sound of his child's heartbeat. When Marco spoke again, his voice was rough, catching on emotion he could not quite hide. "Tell him," the words came out broken, barely controlled, "tell him that Papa is coming. Tell him to hold on. Tell him." His voice cracked completely, and he had to stop and breathe before he could continue. "Tell him Papa is coming right now." Then, sharp and commanding, "Stay on the line. Do not hang up. Keep talking to me. I'm not going anywhere," Lena said. She pulled the phone away from her ear just long enough to put it on speaker, then tucked it into the waterproof pouch where both she and Ethan could hear it. "Ethan, did you hear that?" Your papa is coming. Ethan's face crumpled. For the first time since Lena had found him, something other than fear appeared in his eyes. Hope. Trust. The kind of absolute faith that only a child can have in their parent. He nodded, unable to speak through his wheezing breaths, and tucked himself deeper into Lena's arms. Through the phone, Lena could hear everything happening on Marco's end. Rapid footsteps striking hard floors. A door slamming open. Multiple voices shouting at once, and Marco's voice cutting through them all like a knife. West 23rd. Old maintenance tunnels. Collapsed drainage gate. I want every man we have there in 5 minutes. Clear the streets. I don't care who you have to move. Get me there now. A car door slammed. An engine roared to life, powerful and aggressive, like a beast finally released from its chain. How deep is the water? Marco's voice came through the speaker, and even filtered through the phone. Lena could hear the barely controlled terror underneath his command. Chest height on me, Lena said. I'm 5'6". It's at Ethan's neck, and it's still rising. I'd estimate we have maybe 10 minutes before it's over his head. Can you move him? Can you get him out? Lena looked at the twisted metal pinning Ethan in place, at the way the collapsed gate had buckled and trapped him in a space too narrow for her to maneuver. She had tried to pull him free the moment she found him, but the gate would not budge, and every time she pulled, Ethan cried out in pain. Negative, she said. He's pinned. I'd need tools, cutting equipment, or several people with enough strength to pry the gate open. You'll have both. Marco's voice was absolute certainty. 4 minutes. Hold on for 4 more minutes. Lena could hear him issuing orders in Italian, rapid-fire commands to people who answered with instant obedience. She heard the squeal of tires, the blare of a horn, the sound of a car traveling at speeds that would terrify anyone who was not desperate. Lena. Marco said her name for the first time, and something about hearing it in his voice made her shiver. Talk to me. Tell me about yourself. I need to hear your voice. I need to know you're still there. He was not asking for information. He was asking her to keep talking because silence meant death, and if she stopped talking, it meant the water had risen over their heads. So Lena talked. She told him about growing up in Brooklyn, about her grandmother who raised her after her parents died. She told him about her job, about checking tunnel supports and clearing debris, about working nights because the pay was better and she needed the money. She told him about the rain, about the flooding, about finding Ethan's shoe floating past her in the dark. And she told him, because she needed him to understand, about her younger brother Danny. About how he died in a tunnel collapse when he was 8 years old and Lena was 12. About how she had been there, had survived, but had not been able to save him. That's why I'm here, Lena said quietly. That's why I do this job. Because somewhere in my head, every time I check these tunnels, every time I make sure they're safe, I'm making sure no one else loses their little brother. Her voice broke on the last words, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Marco's voice came through, softer than before, carrying a weight of understanding that told Lena he knew exactly what kind of loss she was talking about. You won't lose him, Marco said. I promise you, Lena. You won't lose him. And something in his voice made her believe him. Lena heard them before she saw them. The rumble of multiple engines. The screech of tires on wet pavement. The sound of car doors slamming open, one after another, like gunshots in the night. Then footsteps. Running. Multiple people, moving with military precision. They're here, Lena said into the phone, and she heard Marco's sharp exhale of relief. Light flooded the tunnel. Not the weak beam of her flashlight, but harsh, bright LED spotlights that turned the darkness into day. Lena squinted against the sudden glare, her arm instinctively tightening around Ethan. Men poured into the tunnel like a flood of their own. 6 of them. No, 7. All tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes that made them blend with the shadows even under the bright lights. They moved with the kind of controlled efficiency that came from training, from discipline, from being very good at very dangerous work. They were not police. They were not firefighters. They were something else entirely. These were Marco Valenti's men. 2 of them carried heavy-duty hydraulic spreaders, the kind used to pry apart crushed cars in accidents. Others carried cutting torches, ropes, medical bags. They assessed the situation in seconds, communicating with each other in sharp Italian, and then they went to work. The water was at Ethan's chin now. Lena had to tilt his head back to keep his nose and mouth above the surface, and she could feel him shaking against her, his small hands fisted in her jumpsuit, holding on like she was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water and fear. "Almost there, sweetheart," Lena whispered. "They're going to get you out. Just a little longer." The hydraulic spreaders bit into the twisted metal with a mechanical shriek. Two men worked the controls while another braced the surrounding structure, muscles straining. The metal groaned, resisted, then slowly, too slowly, began to give way. And then he arrived. Lena felt his presence before she saw him. It was like the air pressure in the tunnel changed, like everyone suddenly stood a little straighter, moved a little faster. Marco Valenti stepped into the tunnel, and the world seemed to stop turning. He was tall, taller than any of his men, easily 6'3", with broad shoulders beneath a long black coat that was already soaked from the rain. His hair was dark, almost black, touched with gray at the temples, slicked back from a face that looked like it had been carved from stone. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, a faint scar cutting through his left eyebrow. But it was his eyes that stole Lena's breath. Dark brown, almost black in the harsh light, burning with an intensity that made her feel pinned in place. These were the eyes of a man who held power over life and death, who made decisions that ruined or saved people, who had seen and done things that would break ordinary men. And right now, those eyes were fixed on one thing: his son. Marco moved forward, water splashing up to his thighs, and Lena saw something she would never forget. She saw the moment the cold, dangerous mask cracked and fell away completely. Pain hit his face first, sharp and ruthless. The pain of hours spent not knowing if his child was alive or dead. Then relief crashed through, so powerful it nearly drove him to his knees. His broad shoulders dropped, his breath caught in his throat, and those dark eyes, those cold, terrifying eyes, shimmered with a light Lena knew he never let anyone see. Love. Pure, fierce, absolutely consuming love. "Papa!" Ethan's cry split the air, high and desperate and full of joy. "I'm here, Bambino," Marco said, his voice breaking completely. "Papa's here." The metal gave way with a final shriek. The gate collapsed sideways, and suddenly Ethan was free. Marco surged forward, dropping to his knees in the freezing water without a second thought, his expensive coat forgotten, and his hands closed around his son's small body with a gentleness that seemed impossible from such a large, dangerous man. He lifted Ethan out of the water, held him close against his chest, and his whole body shook. Lena could see his shoulders trembling, could see the way his hands cradled his son's head, could hear the broken Italian words he whispered against Ethan's wet hair. "Mio figlio, mio piccolo, grazie Dio, grazie." Ethan sobbed against his father's neck, small hands fisted in Marco's coat, holding on with every ounce of strength he had left. One of the men appeared with a thermal blanket. Marco wrapped it around Ethan without letting go, without loosening his grip for even a second, as if he was afraid that if he let go, his son might disappear again. A medic moved forward with an oxygen mask, and Marco held it gently to Ethan's face, murmuring soft encouragement as his son's labored breathing finally began to ease. Lena stood in the water, suddenly aware of how cold she was, how exhausted, how her legs were shaking and her hands were numb. She had done her part. The boy was safe. His father had him. She could go now. She took one step back, meaning to slip away quietly, to let them have their reunion without an audience. But then Ethan's head turned, his eyes searching through the crowd of men and lights until they found her. "Lena," he called out, his voice muffled by the oxygen mask but desperate. His hand reached for her, and Marco Valenti's eyes followed his son's gaze. For the second time that night, Lena felt the full weight of that stare. But this time, it was different. This time, there was no command in it, no assessment of threat or weakness. This time, there was only gratitude. Raw, overwhelming gratitude that made Lena's chest tighten. Marco stood, Ethan still cradled in his arms, and he walked toward her through the water. His men parted without a word, creating a path. He stopped in front of Lena, and she had to tilt her head back to look at him. He was enormous up close, towering over her, his presence overwhelming. But his eyes were soft. Softer than she would have thought possible. "You saved my son," Marco said. His voice was low, rough with emotion he was not trying to hide anymore. "You stayed with him. You kept him calm. You called me." He paused, and when he continued, each word carried the weight of a vow. "I will never forget what you did tonight." Lena wanted to say something light, something dismissive, to wave it off the way she always did when people thanked her. She was just doing her job. Anyone would have done the same. But the words would not come. Because she was looking into the eyes of a man whose entire world had almost ended tonight, and she knew that empty platitudes would be an insult to what he was feeling. So she just nodded, her throat too tight to speak. Marco shifted Ethan in his arms, and with his free hand, he reached out. Lena stared at that hand. Large, strong, scarred across the knuckles. A hand that had done things she probably did not want to know about. A hand that belonged to a man who lived in a world of shadows and danger. And yet, it was extended toward her in a simple, ancient gesture of gratitude and respect. She reached out and placed her hand in his. The moment their skin touched, everything stopped. A jolt of electricity, fierce and startling, shot up Lena's arm from the point of contact. Warmth flooded through her, spreading from her hand to her chest, racing through her veins like fire. Her breath caught in her throat. Her heart stuttered, skipped a beat, then started again harder and faster. She could not move, could not pull away, could only stand there, frozen, staring up at Marco as the world around them faded into nothing. And Marco had gone completely still. His dark eyes were wide, pupils blown, staring down at her with an expression she could not read. Shock, recognition, something that looked almost like fear. He felt it too, the same impossible current sparking between them. The same sudden blaze of connection between two complete strangers in a flooded tunnel in the middle of the night. Time stretched. 1 second, 2, an eternity compressed into a heartbeat. Then Ethan shifted in his father's arms, coughing softly, and the spell broke. Marco's hand tightened around hers for just a fraction of a second, a squeeze that felt like a promise, and then he let go. Lena's hand dropped to her side, but she could still feel him. Could still feel the imprint of his palm against hers like a brand. "We need to get him to a hospital," one of the men said, voice urgent. Marco nodded, but his eyes stayed on Lena for one more long moment. Like he was trying to memorize her face. Like he was afraid if he looked away, she would vanish. Then he turned and carried his son toward the tunnel exit, his men forming a protective wall around them. But before he disappeared into the light, Ethan looked back over his father's shoulder. He was still wrapped in Lena's green scarf, the frayed edges trailing down like a banner, and his small hand lifted in a wave. "Thank you, Lena," he called, his voice weak but clear. "Thank you for the warm scarf." Lena tried to smile, even though her whole body was shaking. "Take care of yourself, Ethan." And then they were gone. The lights vanished. The engines roared. The convoy pulled away into the rain-soaked night as if it had never been there at all. Lena stood alone in the flooded tunnel. The water was receding now, draining slowly through the damaged gate. Her flashlight had fallen somewhere in the rescue, but enough ambient light remained for her to see. She looked down at her hands. They were empty. Her scarf was gone, wrapped around a little boy she would probably never see again. Her hands were numb from the cold, shaking from exhaustion and adrenaline crash. But her right hand still tingled with warmth. Still remembered the feel of his grip. Lena wrapped her arms around herself and started the long walk back to the surface. She did not know it yet, but her life had just changed forever. Lena did not sleep. She made it back to her apartment just as dawn was breaking, the sky turning from black to gray to a pale, washed-out blue. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city clean and quiet in that brief moment before morning traffic began. Her studio apartment was on the 4th floor of a pre-war building in Queens, the kind of place where the radiator clanged all night and the ceiling leaked when it rained hard. It was small, barely 300 square feet, with a Murphy bed that folded down from the wall, a kitchenette with 2 burners that only sometimes worked, and a bathroom so narrow you had to stand sideways to close the door. But it was hers, or at least, it would be for another 72 hours, assuming she could come up with $400 for rent. Lena peeled off her wet uniform and stood under the shower until the water ran cold, trying to wash away the feeling of the tunnel, the smell of rust and mold and fear. But even after she was clean and dry, wrapped in her threadbare bathrobe with her damp hair hanging loose around her shoulders, she could not stop shaking. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ethan's terrified face. Heard his labored breathing, felt his small hands gripping her wrist with desperate strength. And she saw Marco. Those dark eyes burning with fear and relief. That large hand extended toward her. The electric shock of connection when their skin touched. She should forget about it. About all of it. It had been an emergency, a moment of crisis, nothing more. Marco Valenti lived in a different world. A world of power and danger and wealth that someone like Lena could never understand. He had probably already forgotten about her. She made coffee, instant, because she could not afford anything else, and sat on the window ledge, looking out at the city as it woke up. The eviction notice was taped to her refrigerator, the bold red letters visible even from across the room. Final notice. Pay rent within 72 hours or vacate premises. Lena closed her eyes and pressed her cold hands against her face. She had been so careful. She worked 2 jobs, maintenance at night, data entry during the day when she could get shifts. She skipped meals. She walked instead of taking the subway. She had not bought new clothes in 2 years. But careful was not enough. Not when her grandmother's medical bills had eaten through every dollar of her tiny savings. Not when the cost of living kept rising and wages stayed the same. Not when one unexpected expense, a broken tooth, a stolen bike, a landlord who raised the rent without warning, could destroy everything. 72 hours. Lena opened her eyes and looked at her phone sitting on the narrow counter. No missed calls, no messages. The screen was dark and silent. She did not know what she had expected. Marco Valenti was not going to call her. Why would he? She had done what any decent person would do. She had saved his son. He had thanked her. That was the end of it. So why did she keep staring at her phone? Why did her hand keep reaching for it, checking for notifications that were not there? Lena forced herself to stand. She had a data entry shift in 3 hours, and she needed to at least try to sleep. She folded the Murphy bed down from the wall, crawled under the thin blanket, and closed her eyes. But sleep would not come. Every time she started to drift off, she felt it again. That spark, that electric current when Marco's hand touched hers. The way he had looked at her like he was seeing something he did not understand but could not look away from. She touched her right palm, tracing the lines there as if she could find some physical evidence of what had happened. Nothing, just her own rough, calloused skin. But the feeling remained, a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. A connection that made no sense and refused to fade. Lena rolled onto her side and stared at the water-stained wall until her alarm went off. The second day was harder. Lena went through the motions of her data entry job like a ghost, her fingers typing numbers she did not really see, her mind somewhere else entirely. Her supervisor stopped by her cubicle twice to ask if she was feeling all right, and Lena forced a smile and said she was just tired. It was not a lie. She was exhausted down to her bones, running on coffee and the kind of nervous energy that came from too much stress and too little sleep. But tired was not the problem. The problem was that she could not stop thinking about a little boy in a flooded tunnel and his father who had looked at her like she was someone who mattered. The problem was that every time her phone buzzed, a spam call, a text from her phone company about her bill, her heart jumped into her throat. The problem was that she had saved the number. The number Ethan had recited to her in the tunnel. Marco Valenti's private number. It was saved in her phone under a simple initial. M. She stared at it during her lunch break, sitting alone in the break room with a cup of noodles she was too anxious to eat. She could call. She could check on Ethan, make sure he had recovered from his asthma attack, ask if he was okay. But that was not why she wanted to call. And she knew it. Lena deleted the number, then immediately restored it from her deleted folder. Then deleted it again. She was being ridiculous. Stupid. Marco Valenti was a mafia boss, or at least, that was what everyone said, though no one had ever proven it. He was dangerous. He was powerful. He lived in a world where people got hurt for asking the wrong questions or knowing the wrong things. And she was a broke data entry clerk who was about to be evicted. There was no universe where their paths should cross again. Lena finished her shift and took the subway back to Queens. The eviction notice was still on her refrigerator, and now she only had 48 hours left. She had $200 in her bank account. She needed $400 for rent. That meant she needed to come up with $200 more in 2 days. Lena sat down at her narrow counter and pulled out her laptop, an ancient thing that took 5 minutes just to boot up. She logged into every gig worksite she could find, searching for quick jobs. Anything. Data entry, transcription, delivery driving, pet sitting. But everything paid too little or required resources she did not have. A car for delivery work. A professional portfolio for freelance writing. References and background checks that took weeks to process. She closed the laptop and rested her forehead against the cool surface of the counter. Maybe she should call her landlord, beg for an extension, promise to pay double next month. But she had already tried that twice before, and both times he had refused. The building was being sold, he had told her. New owners wanted everyone out so they could renovate and charge triple the rent. Her eviction was just part of the process. Lena lifted her head and looked at her phone one more time. The number was still there. Saved under M. She could ask for help. Marco had said he would never forget what she did. People said things like that when they were grateful. Sometimes they even meant it. But the thought of calling him, of asking for money, of reducing what had happened in that tunnel to a transaction, it made her feel sick. She had not saved Ethan for a reward. She had saved him because he was a terrified child who needed help. Because leaving him there would have been impossible. Because some things were not about what you could get in return. Lena put her phone face down on the counter and went to take another cold shower. She would figure something out. She always did. On the third day, Lena walked to work. It was a long walk, nearly an hour from her apartment to the maintenance depot, but she needed to save the subway fare. Every dollar mattered now. She had 45 hours left before her landlord could legally change the locks, and she still did not have the rent money. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of November day where your breath came out in clouds and the sky was so blue it almost hurt to look at. Lena wrapped her arms around herself, wishing she still had her grandmother's green scarf. She wondered if Ethan still had it, if he had kept it or if it had been thrown away once they got him clean, dry clothes. Probably thrown away. It had been old and frayed, not the kind of thing that belonged in a mansion. The thought made her sad in a way she did not want to examine too closely. She was halfway through her shift, checking pressure valves in one of the older tunnel sections when her supervisor found her. Frank was a good man, 63 years old, with gray hair and kind eyes, and he had given Lena her job when no one else would hire someone with no experience and no references. She owed him everything. "Lena," Frank said, and something in his voice made her stomach drop. "Can you come to my office for a minute?" Office was a generous word for the converted storage closet where Frank kept his desk and files, but Lena followed him there with her heart pounding. Had she done something wrong? Was she being fired? She could not afford to lose this job. Not now, not with the eviction looming. Frank closed the door and gestured for her to sit. His face was serious but not angry. More like confused, maybe a little worried. "I got a call this morning," he said slowly. "From the executive office. Someone high up in the city infrastructure department." Lena's hands went cold. "Okay. They wanted to know about the rescue 3 nights ago. About the boy in the flooded tunnel." Frank leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "They asked about you specifically. About how you handled the situation. About your training and experience." Oh no. Lena's mind raced. Had she done something wrong? Had Marco reported the incident after all? Was she in trouble for not calling 911 immediately? "Am I being investigated?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No." Frank shook his head quickly. "No, nothing like that. They said," he paused, like he was trying to figure out how to say it. "They said you showed exceptional judgment and skill under pressure. They said you probably saved that kid's life." Lena blinked. "Oh, and then they asked me about your employment status here. How long you've been working for the city. What your performance reviews look like." Frank smiled, just a little. "I told them you're the best worker I've got. That you never call in sick, never complain, always volunteer for the worst shifts." "Thank you," Lena said. She meant it. Frank had always been good to her. "Then they told me something interesting." Frank's smile faded. "They said that effective immediately, you're being given a citation for exemplary service. It comes with a bonus. Paid directly to you." Lena's heart stopped. "A bonus? How much?" Frank pulled a paper from his desk drawer and slid it across to her. Lena looked at the number typed on the official city letterhead. $5,000. Her hands started to shake. $5,000. That was more than enough for rent. That was enough to pay rent and her overdue electric bill and her phone bill and still have money left over. That was enough to breathe for the first time in months. This is real?" she whispered. "As real as it gets." Frank tapped the paper. "Should be in your bank account by end of business today." Lena looked up at him, tears burning in her eyes. "I don't understand. The city doesn't give bonuses like this. Not for something like this." Frank's expression turned serious. "No," he agreed. They don't. Which makes me think someone with a lot of pull made this happen. He paused. You know who that kid was, don't you? The one you saved? Lena nodded slowly. Then you know his father has the kind of connections that can make things happen. Frank leaned back in his chair. I don't know what strings he pulled or who he called. But I'd bet my retirement this came from him. Lena stared at the paper, at the number that would change everything, and she did not know whether to laugh or cry. Marco had done this. He had used his power, his connections, to help her. But he had done it in a way that gave her dignity. Not a handout, not charity, an official recognition for work she had actually done, paid through proper channels where no one could question it. He had seen her, seen what she needed, and he had given it to her without making her ask. Lena? Frank's voice was gentle. You okay? She wiped her eyes quickly. Yeah, I'm okay. I'm just. She laughed, the sound shaky. I'm going to be able to pay my rent. Frank smiled, the kind of warm, fatherly smile that made Lena's chest ache. Good. You deserve it, kid. You really do. Lena walked out of Frank's office in a daze. She finished her shift on autopilot, her mind spinning. Marco Valenti had saved her. Just like she had saved his son. But he had done it without her knowing, without demanding gratitude or acknowledgement. And suddenly, desperately, she wanted to thank him. Wanted to hear his voice. Wanted to know if he was okay, if Ethan was okay, if they had recovered from that terrible night. When her shift ended, Lena walked outside into the cold afternoon air. She pulled out her phone and stared at the screen for a long time. Then, before she could talk herself out of it, she opened her messages and typed out a text to the number saved under Thank you. For everything. I hope Ethan is doing well. Lena. She hit send before she could delete it. The 3 dots appeared immediately, indicating he was typing. Lena's heart hammered against her ribs. Then the response came through. He asks about you every day. Would you like to see him? Lena stared at the message, at the simple question that felt like it carried the weight of the world. Would she like to see him? Yes. God, yes. She wanted to see Ethan, to make sure he was really okay. To know that the rescue had not been just a nightmare. But she also knew that seeing Ethan meant seeing Marco. And seeing Marco meant stepping into his world. A world that was dangerous and complicated and nothing like her own. Her hands shook as she typed her response. I would like that very much. The reply came instantly. Tomorrow, 6 p.m. I'll send a car. And just like that, Lena Moore's quiet, careful life started to unravel. The car that arrived at 5:45 p.m. was not what Lena expected. She had been imagining something ostentatious. A stretch limousine, maybe one of those massive SUVs with tinted windows that screamed, important person inside. Instead, a sleek black sedan pulled up to her building, so understated it could have belonged to anyone. The driver, a man in his 40s with gray at his temples and kind eyes, got out and opened the rear door without a word. Lena had spent 2 hours getting ready. She had exactly 3 outfits that were not work clothes. A pair of jeans, black pants, and a dark blue sweater dress that she had bought from a thrift store 3 years ago. She chose the dress, paired it with her only pair of boots that were not falling apart, and tried to do something with her hair besides pulling it into a messy bun. Now, climbing into the back seat of the sedan, she felt absurdly underdressed. The interior was all soft leather and polished wood, the kind of luxury that whispered, money, instead of shouting it. The drive took 30 minutes, winding out of Queens and into a part of Manhattan Lena rarely saw. Old brownstones gave way to tree-lined streets and elegant pre-war buildings. The kind of neighborhood where doormen wore uniforms and security cameras were hidden in tasteful fixtures. The car pulled up to a building that took up half a city block. Not a skyscraper, something older, more solid. Brick and limestone, with arched windows and iron balconies. The kind of building that had been standing for 100 years and would stand for 100 more. The driver opened her door. 15th floor, he said quietly. Mr. Valenti is expecting you. The lobby was marble and brass, all Art Deco elegance. A doorman nodded to her as she crossed to the elevator, as if strange women showing up at this building was a perfectly normal occurrence. Maybe it was. Maybe Marco had women visit all the time. The thought made something uncomfortable twist in Lena's stomach, but she pushed it away. She was here to see Ethan. That was all. The elevator was the old-fashioned kind, with an accordion gate and brass buttons worn smooth from decades of use. It climbed slowly, giving Lena far too much time to second-guess this decision. What was she doing? She should not be here. She should have stayed in her tiny apartment, grateful for the bonus, and let Marco Valenti and his son fade back into their own world. But the elevator doors opened before she could hit the button for the ground floor. The hallway was quiet, carpeted in deep burgundy, with only 2 doors. One at each end. The door on the left opened before Lena could knock. And there he was. Marco Valenti looked different from the last time she had seen him. No long coat dripping with rain. No terror etched into every line of his face. Tonight he wore dark slacks and a gray sweater, the sleeves pushed up to his elbows, looking almost normal. Almost like a regular person instead of a dangerous man who commanded an empire. But his eyes were the same. Those dark brown eyes that saw everything and missed nothing. Lena, he said her name like a greeting and a question all at once. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the invitation, Lena said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. And thank you for, she paused, not quite sure how to acknowledge what he had done without making it awkward. For the recognition from the city. That was very generous. Something flickered in Marco's eyes. Not embarrassment exactly, more like satisfaction that she understood. You earned it, he said simply. Then he stepped back, opening the door wider. Please, come in. Lena stepped inside, and her breath caught. The apartment was enormous. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over Manhattan, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dusk settled in. But it was not the size or the view that struck her. It was how lived in it felt. No cold minimalism, no showroom perfection. There were books piled on the coffee table. A child's backpack tossed on a chair. Sneakers kicked off by the door. Drawings taped to the refrigerator in the open kitchen. This was not a bachelor pad or a showpiece. This was a home, a place where a father raised his son. Lena. The shout came from down the hallway, and then Ethan burst into the room like a small rocket. He looked so different from the terrified, soaking wet boy in the tunnel. His dark hair was dry and combed, his face bright with color and health. He wore a striped t-shirt and jeans, and he ran toward her with the kind of uncomplicated joy that only children could manage. Lena dropped to her knees just in time for Ethan to crash into her, his arms wrapping around her neck. You came, he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. Papa said you might come, but I was worried you wouldn't. Of course I came, Lena said, hugging him back, and she was surprised by how much she had missed him. This child she barely knew. I wanted to make sure you were okay. Ethan pulled back, beaming up at her. I'm all better. The doctor said my lungs are fine and I only have to use my inhaler twice a day now instead of 4 times. He grabbed her hand, tugging. Come on, I want to show you something. He pulled her down the hallway, past a series of doors, and into a bedroom that was pure childhood joy. Posters on the walls. A massive Lego castle half-built on the floor. Bookshelves packed with everything from picture books to thick fantasy novels. But what dominated the room was the art. Drawings covered every available surface. Taped to the walls, scattered across the desk, pinned to a corkboard. Pencil sketches, watercolors, charcoal pieces. All of them showing real talent, the kind of skill that came from practice and natural ability. You're an artist, Lena said, looking around in awe. I like to draw, Ethan said, suddenly shy. Then he grabbed a sketchbook from his desk and flipped it open to a page near the middle. I drew this the day after you saved me. I wanted to remember. Lena looked at the drawing and her eyes burned with sudden tears. It was her, sitting in the tunnel with water up to her chest, holding a small figure wrapped in a scarf. The proportions were not perfect, he was only 9, after all, but the emotion was there. The way she was holding him close. The way his small hands gripped her wrist. The expression on her face, captured with surprising accuracy, determination mixed with gentleness. Ethan, she whispered. This is beautiful. You can have it if you want, he said quickly. I made it for you. Lena started to protest. This was his work, his memory, but the hope in his eyes stopped her. I would be honored to have it, she said. Thank you. Ethan's smile could have lit up the entire city. They had dinner together. Not some formal affair with a private chef and a dining room that could seat 20. Instead, Marco cooked pasta in the open kitchen while Ethan sat at the counter telling Lena about school, his friends, his favorite books. Papa is really good at cooking, Ethan confided. His Nona, that's my great-grandmother, taught him all the family recipes. It's one of the few useful things she taught me, Marco said from the stove, and there was warmth in his voice when he talked about his grandmother. Lena sat at the counter, sipping wine that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget, and watched Marco move around the kitchen with surprising ease. His hands were quick and sure as he stirred sauce, tested pasta, chopped basil. These were not the hands of a man who ordered staff around. These were the hands of someone who actually knew how to take care of himself and his son. Lena used to have a brother, Ethan said suddenly, and Lena went very still. Marco's hands stilled too. He looked over his shoulder at her, eyebrows raised in question. I told him, Lena said quietly. In the tunnel, when he was scared, I told him about Danny. Understanding flashed in Marco's dark eyes. He set down his wooden spoon and came to stand across the counter from her. How old were you? He asked, his voice gentle. 12. He was 8. Lena traced her finger around the rim of her wine glass. We were exploring the old tunnels near our building. Kids did it all the time, even though we weren't supposed to. And then there was a collapse. Part of the ceiling came down. She swallowed hard. I got out. He didn't. Ethan reached over and put his small hand on hers. The gesture was so simple, so full of compassion, that it nearly broke her. That's why you saved me, Ethan said. It was not a question. Because you couldn't save him. Lena nodded, not trusting her voice. Marco was very quiet for a long moment. Then he said, my wife drowned. Lena looked up sharply. Ethan had gone still beside her. 4 years ago, Marco continued, his voice carefully controlled. We were on a boat. Just the two of us, late at night. She wanted to swim. I told her it was too dark, too cold, but she insisted. Isabella was. He paused, and a small, sad smile touched his mouth. She was fearless. She never listened when I tried to keep her safe. He turned back to the stove, but Lena could see the tension in his shoulders. She got a cramp, went under. I jumped in after her, but the current was strong and it was so dark. By the time I found her, he stopped. The doctors said she had been gone for almost 10 minutes. Her brain was without oxygen for too long. She never woke up. Papa tried, Ethan said quietly, his voice full of a child's absolute faith in his father. He tried so hard to save her. I failed, Marco said, still facing away from them. I failed her, and I swore I would never fail Ethan. He turned back, and his eyes found Lena's. That's why I was so terrified that night. Why I broke every traffic law in the city to get to that tunnel. Because I could not lose him too. I could not fail again. They stared at each other across the kitchen, and Lena understood. They were the same, both of them haunted by the people they could not save. Both of them carrying guilt that logic said they should not feel but could not put down. You didn't fail her, Lena said softly. Just like I didn't fail Danny. Sometimes terrible things happen, and they're no one's fault. Do you believe that? Marco asked. I'm trying to, Lena admitted. Marco held her gaze for another long moment. Then he nodded, as if she had passed some kind of test, and went back to finishing dinner. They ate at the small table by the window, the three of them, and it felt strangely normal. Ethan chattered about his day, asking Lena questions about her work, about her apartment, about what she liked to do when she was not checking tunnels. I don't really have hobbies, Lena admitted. I mostly work. That's sad, Ethan said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Everyone should have hobbies. What's your hobby? Lena asked. Drawing, obviously. Ethan pointed at the walls covered in his artwork. And reading. And building things with Legos. And playing piano, but I'm not very good at that yet. He's better than he thinks, Marco said. He has his mother's ear for music. After dinner, Ethan brought out a battered box of a board game, and they played until Ethan's eyes started to droop. Marco scooped him up without a word and carried him to his room for bed. Lena stood by the window, looking out at the city lights, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time. Peace. When Marco returned, he found her there, her reflection visible in the glass, and he came to stand beside her. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Ethan has been asking about you every single day. I think you became a hero to him. I'm not a hero, Lena said. I just did what needed to be done. That's exactly what a hero is, Marco said. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Marco said, Can I ask you something? Lena nodded. Why did you trust me? That night in the tunnel. When you called me instead of the police. You didn't know me. You knew what people say about me, about my family. You knew it could have been dangerous. So why? Lena thought about it. Because Ethan trusted you, she said simply. The way he said, Papa. The way he knew you would come. Children know who is safe and who isn't. And he knew you were safe. Marco was quiet for a long time. When he spoke again, his voice was rough. No one has ever said that about me before. That I'm safe. Maybe no one else has seen what I saw, Lena said. Marco turned to face her, and suddenly they were very close. Close enough that Lena could see the lighter flecks in his dark eyes. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. I would like to see you again, Marco said. It was not a demand or an assumption. It was a careful question. Not for Ethan. For me. Would that be all right? Lena's heart hammered in her chest. Every rational part of her brain was screaming that this was a bad idea. That Marco Valenti was dangerous. That his world was not her world. That she should thank him politely and leave and never come back. But she was so tired of being careful. So tired of being alone. And when she looked into his eyes, she did not see a dangerous mafia boss. She saw a man who had lost someone he loved and was trying to be a good father and was looking at her like she was something precious. Yes, she said, that would be all right. Marco smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Made him look younger, happier, almost boyish. Tomorrow night, he said. Let me take you to dinner. A real date. A date, Lena repeated, testing the word. Unless you would prefer something else. We could. A date sounds perfect, Lena interrupted, and she was surprised by how much she meant it. Marco walked her to the door. The driver was already waiting downstairs, ready to take her home. But before she left, Marco caught her hand. The same electric current sparked between them, just as powerful as the first time. Lena, he said, and the way he said her name made her shiver. I'm very glad you picked up the phone that night. Me too, Lena whispered. And this time, when she left, she did not feel like she was walking away. She felt like she was walking toward something. Marco picked her up himself the next night. No driver, no sedan, just Marco, standing outside her building in a black wool coat, hands in his pockets, looking slightly nervous in a way that made Lena's heart flutter. You didn't have to come all the way to Queens, Lena said as she climbed into the passenger seat of his car, a sleek Audi that purred like a contented cat. Yes, I did, Marco said simply. I wanted to. He drove them into Manhattan, navigating the evening traffic with easy competence. Classical music played softly from the speakers, something piano-heavy and beautiful. Chopin, Marco said, noticing her listening. Ethan's been learning this piece. He plays it constantly, even the parts he gets wrong. You love him very much, Lena observed. He's everything, Marco said, and there was no hesitation in his voice. Everything I do, every decision I make, it's for him. To keep him safe. To give him a good life. Even the dangerous parts? Lena asked carefully. Marco's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Especially the dangerous parts. They drove in silence for a few minutes. Then Marco said, I'm not going to lie to you, Lena. My family's business has complicated aspects. Things I'm not proud of. Things I would change if I could. But you can't change them, Lena said. No. I inherited an empire built on power and fear. And once you're at the top. He trailed off. There's no easy way out. Too many people depend on the structure. Too many enemies waiting for any sign of weakness. That sounds lonely, Lena said quietly. Marco glanced at her, surprised. It is. Very lonely. He pulled up to a building in Midtown, but instead of valet parking, he drove down into an underground garage. Private. Exclusive. They took an elevator that required a key card to operate, and when the doors opened, Lena gasped. They were on the roof of the building. A private rooftop garden, enclosed by glass walls that blocked the wind but not the view. Manhattan spread out below them in every direction, millions of lights twinkling against the dark sky. In the center of the space was a single table, set for two, candles already lit. You rented out an entire rooftop? Lena asked. I own the building, Marco said, almost apologetically. This seemed more private than a restaurant. A chef appeared from a small kitchen space, greeting Marco warmly in Italian, and Lena realized this was not about showing off wealth. This was about control, about creating a space where Marco could let his guard down without worrying about being seen or overheard. They sat down, and dinner was brought out course by course. Perfectly prepared, each dish explained by the chef, who clearly took pride in his work. But Lena barely tasted the food. She was too aware of Marco sitting across from her, his dark eyes reflecting the candlelight, his presence overwhelming even in the vast open space. Tell me about yourself, Marco said. I know you work in the tunnels. I know you lost your brother. But I don't know anything else. What do you like? What do you want? No one had asked Lena these questions in years. She had to think about the answers. I like books, she said finally. Old ones, with worn covers and notes written in the margins by people I'll never meet. I like walking through the city early in the morning before everyone wakes up. I like the smell of rain on concrete. She paused. As for what I want, I used to want to go to college. Study architecture, maybe. Design buildings that would last. But that was a long time ago. What stopped you? Marco asked. Money, time, life. Lena shrugged. My grandmother got sick right after I graduated high school. I had to work to pay for her care. And after she died, I was so far behind that catching up seemed impossible. It's not impossible, Marco said. If you wanted to go back to school. I don't need you to save me, Lena interrupted gently. I need you to understand that this is my life. It's not glamorous, but it's mine, and I've worked hard for everything I have. Marco studied her for a long moment. You're very proud. Is that a problem? No, he said, and a smile touched his lips. It's refreshing. Most people in my world want something from me. Money, power, access. You're the first person in years who seems to want nothing at all. I want something, Lena admitted. What? I want to know you're a good man. I want to know that what I saw in that tunnel. The father who was terrified for his son. That's the real you. Not the rumors. Not the reputation. You. Marco's expression went very serious. He set down his fork and leaned forward. I have done things I'm not proud of, he said quietly. I have hurt people, made decisions that kept me awake at night. I'm not a good man by any conventional definition. Lena's heart sank. But, Marco continued, I try to be better than I was. I try to protect the people who depend on me. I try to teach my son that power should be used to help, not harm. I try to make choices that I can live with. He held her gaze. I'm not asking you to excuse what I've done or who I am. I'm asking if you can see past it. If you're willing to know me anyway. Lena thought about it. She thought about Ethan's trust in his father. About the way Marco had looked at her in the tunnel like she was performing a miracle. About the apartment full of his son's drawings and the way he cooked dinner with his own hands. Yes, she said, I'm willing. The relief in Marco's eyes was so profound it made Lena's chest ache. They talked for hours. About books and music and childhood memories. About Marco's grandmother who had raised him after his parents died. About Lena's best friend in high school who had moved to California and slowly drifted away. About small things and large things and everything in between. And when the chef finally left for the night and they were alone on the rooftop under the stars, Marco stood and offered Lena his hand. Dance with me, he said. There's no music, Lena pointed out. Marco pulled out his phone and pressed a button. The same Chopin piece from the car filled the air, flowing from hidden speakers. Lena took his hand and let him pull her close. His arm wrapped around her waist, solid and sure, and they swayed together under the stars. She could feel his heart beating against her cheek. Could smell his cologne, something woodsy and expensive. Could feel the warmth of his body through their clothes. This is dangerous, she whispered. What is? Marco's voice rumbled in his chest. This. You. The way I feel when I'm near you. Marco's arm tightened around her. I know. I feel it too. They danced in silence for a moment. Then Marco tipped her chin up with one gentle finger, making her look at him. His dark eyes were intense, burning with something that made Lena's breath catch. I want to kiss you, he said. But I need you to tell me it's all right. I need to know you want this too. Lena's heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Every rational thought was screaming at her to say no, to step back, to protect herself. But she did not want to be rational. Not tonight. Yes, she breathed. Kiss me. Marco's hand cupped her face, gentle despite its size and strength. He lowered his head slowly, giving her every chance to change her mind, to pull away. Lena did not pull away. Their lips met, and the world stopped. It was not a rough kiss or a demanding one. It was soft, tender, a question asked and answered without words. Marco's thumb stroked her cheek, and Lena's hands fisted in his coat, holding on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had started spinning. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. Marco rested his forehead against hers, eyes closed. Mio Dio, he whispered. You're going to destroy me. You're going to destroy me first, Lena whispered back. Then we'll destroy each other, Marco said, and kissed her again. The dates became a pattern. Every few days, Marco would text her. Simple messages, brief invitations, and Lena, despite knowing better, despite all the warnings in her head, always said yes. He took her to a private viewing at the Metropolitan Museum after hours, when the galleries were empty and silent. They wandered through rooms of art, and Marco surprised her by knowing the history of every painting, every sculpture. My mother was an art historian, he explained, standing in front of a Renaissance painting. Before she married into the family. She used to bring me here every weekend. You miss her, Lena said. Every day. Marco's eyes were fixed on the painting. She died when I was 14. Cancer. Fast and brutal. I'm sorry, Lena said, taking his hand. Marco looked down at their joined hands, then back at the painting. She made me promise something before she died. She made me promise that I would always have beauty in my life. That I wouldn't let the family business turn me into someone who only saw power and money and violence. Have you kept that promise? Lena asked. I've tried. He turned to face her. I restore paintings. It's my secret. Only Ethan knows. I have a studio in the building, and late at night, when he's asleep, I work on pieces that have been damaged or neglected. Bringing them back to life. Lena stared at him. You restore paintings. It's how I stay sane, Marco admitted. It's the only time my hands don't feel dirty. Show me, Lena said impulsively. Show me your studio. Marco looked surprised, then pleased. Now? Now. He drove them back to his building, and they took the elevator to the 14th floor. Marco unlocked a door Lena had not noticed before, and they stepped into a large, bright space that smelled like turpentine and linseed oil. The studio was filled with paintings in various stages of restoration. Some barely started, others nearly complete. An easel stood in the center with a half-restored landscape, the colors bright where Marco had been working, faded and cracked where he had not yet reached. This is beautiful, Lena breathed, moving closer to examine his work. Marco, this is incredible. It's the only thing I'm proud of, he said quietly. The only thing that's mine that doesn't come from the family name or the business. Lena turned to him. You should be proud of more than this. You should be proud of how you're raising Ethan. You should be proud of how you treat people with kindness when you don't have to. Marco crossed the space between them in 2 strides and kissed her, hard and desperate, like he was trying to breathe in her words and make them true. Another time, he took her to a sunrise ferry, the two of them standing at the rail as the boat cut through dark water and the sky slowly lightened from black to gray to pink. Tell me something true, Marco said, his arm around her shoulders to block the wind. What do you mean? Lena asked. Something real. Something you don't tell other people. Lena thought about it. Then she said, I'm tired of being alone. I've been alone for so long that I forgot what it felt like to have someone. And now, she looked up at him. Now I'm terrified that I'm going to get used to this. That I'm going to need you. And then you're going to realize I'm not worth the trouble. Marco's arm tightened around her. You're worth everything, he said fiercely. And I'm not going anywhere. You can't promise that, Lena said. Watch me, Marco said, and kissed her as the sun broke over the horizon. On another date, he brought her to a private garden hidden in the middle of Manhattan. It was November, and most of the flowers were gone, but the bare trees and the stone paths had a beauty of their own. They sat on a bench, Lena wrapped in Marco's coat because she had forgotten her own, and Ethan's words kept running through her head. Papa said you might come, but I was worried you wouldn't. Does Ethan know? Lena asked. About us? He knows I like you, Marco said. He knows I've been taking you on dates. But I haven't told him anything serious yet. I didn't want to. He trailed off. Didn't want to get his hopes up if I decided to leave? Lena finished. Marco nodded. He's already lost his mother. I don't want him to lose anyone else. I'm not going anywhere, Lena said, echoing his earlier words. You can't promise that, Marco said, throwing her own words back at her. Watch me, Lena said, and kissed him. But between the dates, reality kept intruding. Lena still worked her shifts in the tunnels. Still came home exhausted and sore. Still lived in her tiny apartment with the leaky ceiling and the radiator that clanged. Marco never pushed her to change her life. Never suggested she should quit her job or move to a better place. He seemed to understand that she needed her independence, needed to feel like she was not being bought or saved. But there was a distance between them, too. A line Marco would not cross. He never invited her to stay the night. Never suggested she should move in. Never talked about the future in concrete terms. And Lena knew why. Because Marco's world was dangerous. Because people who got close to him became targets. Because falling in love with him was not just emotionally risky, it was physically dangerous. She should have been more careful. Should have kept more distance. Should have protected her heart better. But it was already too late for that. She was falling in love with Marco Valenti, and she did not know how to stop. Everything changed on a Tuesday. Lena was at work, checking one of the newer tunnel sections when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost did not answer. But something made her hit the accept button. Hello, Lena? A child's voice, high and scared. Lena, it's Ethan. Lena's heart stopped. Ethan? What's wrong? Where's your dad? He doesn't know I'm calling. I'm at school and something happened and I'm scared and I didn't know who else to call in. Slow down, sweetheart. Take a breath. Tell me what happened. There was a man, Ethan said, his words tumbling over each other. Outside the school. He was watching me during recess. And when I came back in, he was still there. And my bodyguard saw him too, and he got really mad and called Papa, and now everyone's acting weird and I'm in the principal's office and his voice broke. I want my dad but he's in a meeting and I'm scared. Okay, Lena said, forcing her voice to stay calm even though her pulse was racing. Okay, Ethan, listen to me. You're in the principal's office? Good. That's safe. You have your bodyguard with you? Tony's outside the door. Okay. And you're safe inside. The man who was watching you, he's not there anymore. I don't know. I can't see. Lena made a decision. Ethan, I'm coming to get you. What's the name of your school? He told her. It was in Manhattan, 40 minutes away if she pushed it. Stay in that office. Stay with Tony. Don't go anywhere. Don't talk to anyone you don't know. I'll be there as fast as I can, and then we'll call your dad together. Okay? Okay. Ethan's voice was shaky but steadier. Okay. Please hurry. I'm already moving, Lena said. She ran up to the surface, ignoring her supervisor's shout asking where she was going. Into the nearest subway station, jamming onto a train that was far too slow. The 40-minute trip felt like 40 hours. When she finally made it to the school, a prestigious private academy behind high fences and security gates, she had to talk her way past 3 layers of security, flashing her ID and explaining that she was here for Ethan Valenti, that she had permission from his father, that this was an emergency. They finally let her through, and she found Ethan in the principal's office exactly where he said he would be, sitting in a chair that was too big for him, clutching his backpack. When he saw her, his face crumpled. Lena, she caught him as he launched himself at her, his arms wrapping around her neck, his small body shaking. I've got you, Lena said, holding him tight. I've got you, sweetheart. You're safe. The bodyguard, Tony, a massive man with gray hair and sharp eyes, watched them with an expression Lena could not read. Did you call Mr. Valenti? Lena asked him. He's on his way, Tony said. He was in a meeting uptown. Should be here in 10 minutes. And the man who was watching Ethan? Gone by the time I got outside. But I got a description. Mr. Valenti's people are looking into it. Lena wanted to ask more questions, but Ethan was still holding onto her like a lifeline, so she just sat down in one of the chairs and pulled him into her lap, even though he was really too big for it. You did exactly the right thing, she told him. Calling me, staying in a safe place, telling the adults what you saw. You were so brave, Ethan. I was scared, he admitted. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you're scared and you do the smart thing anyway. They sat like that until the door burst open and Marco strode in. He looked terrifying. His face was set in hard lines, his eyes cold and furious, his whole body radiating barely controlled violence. This was not the Marco who cooked pasta in his kitchen or danced with her under the stars. This was the other Marco. The one who ran an empire built on fear. But then he saw Ethan in Lena's arms, and the mask cracked. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to his knees in front of them, and pulled Ethan into a crushing hug. Papa, Ethan sobbed into his father's shoulder. Papa, I was so scared. I know, Bambino. I know. Marco's voice was rough, broken. But you're safe now. I'm here. Nothing is going to hurt you. He looked over Ethan's head at Lena, and his eyes were full of too many emotions to name. Gratitude, fear, something that looked a lot like love. You came, he said. Of course I came, Lena said. Marco held out his free arm, and Lena found herself pulled into the embrace too. The 3 of them holding each other in the principal's office while Tony stood guard at the door. Later, after they had taken Ethan home and Marco had posted extra security around the building and made a dozen phone calls in rapid Italian, after Ethan had finally fallen asleep on the couch between them, Marco turned to Lena. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For coming. For being there for him when I couldn't." "You were in a meeting," Lena said. "You came as soon as you could. I should have been there. I should have." He stopped, running his hands through his hair. "This is my fault. Someone is trying to send me a message by threatening my son. And now I've put you in danger too." "What do you mean?" Lena asked. "They saw you come to the school. They'll know you're connected to us now. They'll know you're someone who matters to me." Marco's jaw clenched. "I should have been more careful. I should have kept you separate from this part of my life." "Maybe I don't want to be separate," Lena said. Marco looked at her sharply. "You don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do." Lena reached over Ethan's sleeping form and took Marco's hand. "I know your world is dangerous. I know there are people who want to hurt you, who might try to hurt me to get to you. But I also know that I care about you. About Ethan, and I'm not walking away just because things got scary." "Lena, no, listen to me." She squeezed his hand. "I spent my whole life being careful, being safe, keeping everyone at arm's length so I wouldn't get hurt. And you know what? I was miserable. I was lonely. I had nothing." She leaned closer. "These past few weeks with you have been the happiest I've been in years. Maybe ever. And yes, it's terrifying. Yes, today scared me. But walking away from this, from you, would be worse." Marco stared at her for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he stood and scooped Ethan into his arms. "I'm going to put him to bed," he said. "Don't move. I'll be right back." Lena sat on the couch, her heart pounding, wondering if she had said too much. If she had pushed too hard. But when Marco came back, he did not look angry. He looked decided. He sat down beside her and took both her hands in his. "If you stay," he said, "if you choose this, then you need to understand what it means. It means bodyguards. It means security protocols. It means there will be times when I have to make decisions that you don't agree with. Decisions to keep you safe even if you don't think you need protecting." "Okay," Lena said. "It means no more walking alone at night. No more taking the subway at odd hours. No more putting yourself in danger. Marco, it also means," he continued, his voice softening, "that you become part of this family. You become someone I protect with everything I have. You become someone who matters more to me than anything except Ethan." Lena's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I love you." The words came out raw and honest. "I fell in love with you the night you saved my son. I fell in love with your courage and your kindness and the way you looked at me like I was more than just the sum of my worst decisions. And if you stay, if you choose me, then I'm going to love you for the rest of my life." Tears spilled down Lena's cheeks. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, but I can't help it." Marco pulled her into his arms and kissed her, deep and fierce and full of promise. "Then stay," he said against her lips. "Stay with us. Move in here. Let me keep you safe. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Yes," Lena said, and kissed him again. "Yes." Lena did not move in immediately. First, there were practical matters to handle. She had to give notice at her apartment, had to pack up her few belongings, had to explain to Frank that she was taking a leave of absence from the tunnel job, at least for now. Frank, bless him, did not ask too many questions. He just hugged her and told her to be careful and to call if she ever needed anything. But before she moved into Marco's building, there was something else that needed to happen. Marco took her back to the tunnel. Not the same tunnel where she had found Ethan, that one was still closed for repairs. But a similar one, older and deeper, the kind of place where darkness pressed in from all sides and the walls seemed to close around you. "Why are we here?" Lena asked as they descended the metal stairs, Marco's men positioned at intervals to ensure privacy and safety. "Because I need you to understand something," Marco said. He led her to a section of tunnel where the walls had been recently reinforced, new concrete bright against the old. "This is where your brother died. This tunnel." Lena went very still. "How do you know that?" "I looked into it after you told me the story. I wanted to understand." Marco gestured to the walls, the ceiling. The collapse that killed him was caused by a construction company cutting corners. They didn't properly reinforce the supports because it was faster and cheaper to skip that step. "I know," Lena said quietly. "The investigation found that, but the company was never held accountable. They were owned by the Moretti family," Marco said. "One of our rivals. And they made sure the investigation went nowhere. Made sure no one talked. Lena looked at him sharply. Why are you telling me this? Because 2 weeks ago, I bought that company. Forced them into bankruptcy and bought up their assets. And then I turned over all their internal documents to the district attorney. Documents that proved they knew the tunnels were unsafe. That they falsified inspection reports. That they were responsible for your brother's death and a dozen other collapses. Lena's hands had started to shake. Marco, they'll face charges, he said. Real charges this time. The people responsible will go to prison. He stepped closer to her. I can't bring your brother back. I can't undo what happened. But I can give you justice. I can make sure it doesn't happen again. Tears were streaming down Lena's face now. Why? Why would you do that? Because you deserve it. Because Danny deserved it. Marco cupped her face gently. And because I needed you to see that this is what I can do. This is what my power can accomplish when it's used the right way. Lena threw her arms around him and cried into his chest, great heaving sobs that shook her whole body. Crying for Danny. Crying for the years of guilt and grief. Crying in relief that maybe, finally, she could let it go. Marco held her through it all, his arms steady and strong around her, murmuring soft words in Italian that she did not need to understand to know what they meant. When she finally pulled back, wiping her eyes, Marco took a small box from his pocket. This isn't a proposal, he said quickly, seeing her expression. Not yet, but I want you to have this. He opened the box, and inside was a ring. Not a diamond. An emerald, deep green and glowing in the dim tunnel light, set in white gold. Green like your eyes, Marco said. And like hope. Like new life growing in dark places. It's beautiful, Lena whispered. It belonged to my mother, Marco said. She gave it to me before she died and told me to give it to someone who mattered. Someone who saw me for who I really was, not just who the family name made me. He took the ring out and slipped it onto her right hand, not her left. When you're ready, he said. When you're sure this is what you want, I'll ask you properly. I'll get down on one knee and do it right. But for now, I just want you to have this. To know that you matter. To me, to Ethan, to this family. Lena looked down at the ring on her hand, the emerald catching the light, and she felt something settle into place in her chest. Something that had been broken for a very long time. I'm sure now, she said. I'm ready now. Marco's eyes went wide. Lena, ask me, she said. Ask me here, in the place where everything began. Where I lost my brother and found your son. Where my old life ended and my new one started. Marco stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he dropped to one knee on the concrete floor of the tunnel. Lena Moore, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You saved my son's life. You brought light into our darkness. You made me believe I could be more than what my family made me. You made me want to be better, to do better, to create something good out of all this power. He took her left hand in both of his. I love you. I will love you until the day I die. I will protect you. I will cherish you. I will spend every day trying to be worthy of you. His dark eyes held hers, and in them, Lena saw everything. All his fear and hope and love laid bare. Will you marry me? Marco asked. Will you be my wife? Will you be Ethan's mother? Will you take a chance on this broken, dangerous man who loves you more than life itself? Lena dropped to her knees in front of him, there in the tunnel, in the darkness, in the place where death and life had met. Yes, she said, her voice steady and sure. Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, I'll be your wife. Yes, I'll be Ethan's mother. Yes to all of it. Marco's face broke into a smile so wide and joyful it made him look like a completely different person. He pulled the emerald ring off her right hand and slid it onto her left, and then he kissed her. They knelt there, in the tunnel where everything had changed, and they kissed like they were sealing a vow. A promise that would last forever. Above them, on the streets of Manhattan, life went on. People rushed to work. Cars honked. The city breathed and moved and lived. But down in the darkness, two people who had been lost found each other. And decided to never let go.